Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, remembered by both allies and enemies as the Desert Fox, was one of the most legendary military leaders of World War II. Admired for his tactical brilliance, Rommel carved his name in history during the North African campaign, where he transformed the war in favor of the Axis despite leading an undersupplied, overstretched German-Italian force against the British Empire and Commonwealth forces. A humble man with modest beginnings, Rommel's rise from the son of a schoolteacher to Hitler's favored general made him a unique figure in the upper echelons of the German military. The Afrika Korps under Rommel achieved remarkable victories against the British Eighth Army, demonstrating his mastery of maneuver warfare. His audacity, combined with his ability to outthink and outmaneuver superior forces, earned him deep respect from both his men and his enemies. British, Australian, New Zealand, South African, Indian, and Polish soldiers who fought against him acknowledged his honor on the battlefield. Rommel's relentless campaigns across the vast, arid landscapes of Libya and Egypt turned him into the focal point of Allied strategy and propaganda. He was feared and admired as the most dangerous opponent in the North African theater. However, despite Rommel's tactical genius, he fought an uphill battle. The Afrika Korps lacked the supply lines, reinforcements, and logistics necessary for sustained success. For every brilliant tactical maneuver Rommel devised, he was forced to rely on ingenuity to compensate for shortages of fuel, equipment, and manpower. By late 1942, the tide began to turn against him. The British, under the command of General Bernard Montgomery, were reinforced with fresh supplies and soldiers, and launched a counteroffensive at El Alamein that would mark the beginning of the end for the Axis in North Africa. In a remarkable contrast to the brutality of the Eastern Front, the North African campaign was often fought with an old-fashioned sense of chivalry. Prisoners were treated with respect, and Rommel himself was known for refusing to execute captured enemy soldiers, which was a far cry from the horrific atrocities committed elsewhere. Despite this, the British recognized Rommel's capabilities and sought to eliminate him. British Special Operations Forces launched several missions aimed at assassinating him, but due to poor intelligence and logistical issues, they failed. Rommel, often leading from the front, narrowly escaped death or capture numerous times. Rommel's rise in prominence had its roots not just in his military accomplishments, but in his early political connections. A favorite of Adolf Hitler, Rommel had commanded Hitler's personal bodyguard during the invasion of Poland in 1939. His humble origins, unlike many of the Prussian aristocrats that dominated the upper ranks of the Wehrmacht, endeared him to the Nazi leadership, who saw him as a man of the people. He was a poster child for the regime, a symbol of the New Germany, where talent could rise above social class. But this relationship would sour in the years to come. By 1943, Rommel began to grow disillusioned with Hitler's strategic decisions. After the disastrous end to the North African campaign in Tunisia, Rommel, exhausted and dispirited, was recalled to Europe. The war he once commanded was slipping out of his control, and so too was his faith in Hitler. His doubts about the Führer's leadership only deepened as he took command of the defense of occupied France in late 1943, where the Allies were preparing for a massive invasion. Now tasked with strengthening the Atlantic Wall, Rommel found himself at odds with his superior, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, and Hitler himself. Rommel argued that the only way to defeat the inevitable Allied invasion was to smash them as they landed on the beaches. He wanted to station Germany's powerful panzer divisions near the coast, believing that the Allied air forces would prevent any significant counterattacks further inland. Rundstedt, on the other hand, believed in a more traditional approach, keeping the panzers in reserve for a counteroffensive once the Allies had committed their forces deeper into France. Hitler, characteristically indecisive, failed to back either man's strategy fully, leading to a compromised and disjointed defense plan. When the Allies launched Operation Overlord on June 6, 1944, D-Day, the German response was slow and fragmented. Hitler, convinced that the landings in Normandy were a feint to divert attention from a real invasion at the Pas de Calais, delayed releasing reinforcements. This fatal hesitation allowed the Allies to secure beachheads they would never be forced to abandon. One Panzer Division, the 21st, positioned near the coast as a nod to Rommel's strategy, did launch a counterattack on D-Day. It briefly broke through to the coast between the British Sword Beach and the Canadian Juno Beach. However, lacking support and reinforcements, the division was forced to withdraw, proving Rommel's belief that the panzers needed to be at the forefront. Yet the debate over the best strategy to defend France would haunt military historians for decades. As the Allies expanded their beachhead, Rommel faced a grim reality. His forces, particularly the panzers, were being decimated by relentless Allied air superiority. Rommel, the master of blitzkrieg, was helpless as his once mighty forces were ground down in a brutal war of attrition he knew Germany could not win. Despairing, he proposed pulling German forces back to regroup, but Hitler dismissed the idea. The Nazi leadership was determined to hold every inch of ground, regardless of the cost. Rommel's personal fate was sealed when, on July 17, 1944, his staff car was attacked by an Allied fighter, most likely a Spitfire piloted by either South African ace Chris Leroux or Canadian pilot Charlie Fox. Driving unescorted through the dangerous roads of Normandy, Rommel's vehicle was strafed with cannon fire. The driver, mortally wounded, lost control, and Rommel was either thrown from the car or leaped out in a desperate attempt to save his life. Severely injured, with multiple skull fractures and a face scarred by glass and shrapnel, Rommel was evacuated to Germany, where he began a long and painful recovery. It was during this period of convalescence that fate would finally catch up with the Desert Fox. Just 3 days after Rommel's near-death experience, Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, a member of the German military resistance, planted a bomb in Hitler's headquarters, the Wolf's Lair, in an attempt to assassinate the Führer. The plot, known as Operation Valkyrie, failed when Hitler survived the explosion. In the subsequent fallout, the Gestapo launched a brutal purge of those suspected of involvement. Rommel, despite being bedridden from his injuries, soon came under suspicion. His disillusionment with Hitler had been noted by his colleagues, and his name was whispered by those arrested in connection with the July plot. General Hans Speidel, Rommel's chief of staff, was a known conspirator. Though Rommel had never explicitly committed to the assassination of Hitler, preferring to see him placed on trial for his crimes, he had been in contact with several high-ranking officers involved in the resistance. Rommel's opposition to the Führer had not gone unnoticed. In October 1944, Rommel's fate was sealed. Hitler, unwilling to see his once great general publicly humiliated or tried in the People's Court, gave Rommel a choice: commit suicide quietly, and his family would be spared, or face a sham trial, execution, and the destruction of his family. On October 14, 2 generals arrived at Rommel's home with a vial of cyanide. Choosing to protect his wife and son, Rommel swallowed the poison. His death was officially attributed to the wounds he had sustained in Normandy, and Hitler ordered a state funeral for the man once hailed as Germany's greatest military hero. The legacy of Erwin Rommel is complex. He was a brilliant tactician, a man of honor in a war defined by atrocities, and a general who eventually turned against the very regime that had once lionized him. Had Rommel survived the war, or had he been able to play a decisive role in the resistance, it is possible that history might remember him differently. As it stands, his story is one of tragic brilliance, a man caught between loyalty to his country and opposition to the madness of its leader.